Last episode I talked about Velsarbor as an example of vertical level design in a JRPG, and honestly, that is an unusual trait of the game, because most classic JRPGs, especially RPG Maker games, have very flat exploration. You walk from town to dungeon, dungeon to boss, boss to cutscene. But movement itself is rarely interesting, and there is a reason for that. This will be the focal point of this episode. Hi, I'm Lord, and welcome to Mind Behind Media. JRPGs inherited a lot from tabletop RPGs, which means they almost always have one foot in simulation. Movement exists to transport the player, not to engage them. But once you start adding jumping, speed, and verticality, exploration stops being navigation and starts becoming gameplay. That idea has appeared before. Alundra experimented with vertical exploration, but that game was closer to Zelda than a traditional JRPG. Super Mario RPG played with platforming, but those sections were slower and more deliberate. Precision was expected of the player. There was never a real sense of momentum or speed, and that is where Velsarbor becomes interesting, because Velsarbor turns traversal into something active. You can sprint through the environment and leap onto higher platforms. Those elevated areas usually contain treasure. Suddenly, exploration has rhythm. You are no longer just moving through space, you are reading terrain. The game even communicates traversal opportunities visually. Orange markers indicate normal jumps. Blue markers require a running start, and immediately the world becomes more readable. But this system also reveals a major problem, because Velsarbor only allows jumping in designated areas, which creates a strange contradiction. On one hand, limited jumps prevent empty exploration. If players could jump everywhere, movement might feel pointless. But on the other hand, designated jump spots remove mystery. The moment players see a marker, they already know something valuable is there. The discovery becomes mechanical instead of organic. And this is where many JRPG systems begin to collide with each other. Because traversal in Velsarbor feels fast, however, random encounters punish speed. The longer you sprint through the world, the more likely combat becomes. An exclamation mark flashes above the player. Then the game interrupts you, and suddenly the entire pace changes. Imagine playing a racing game, but every time you crash, the game forces you to play Tetris for 30 seconds. I would argue that would become annoying very quickly. And this is why system switching is such a difficult problem in JRPGs. You are in one emotional state, then the game abruptly asks you to enter another. Fast exploration, slow combat. These systems fight each other. So how do we solve this? Interestingly, another RPG already explored a possible answer. In Weird and Unfortunate Things Are Happening, random encounters are controlled by a visible combat meter. A bar slowly fills as you move, but players can collect orbs to reduce it, and that small idea changes everything. Because now, movement and combat are connected systems. So imagine combining that idea with Velsarbor. You sprint through the environment while a combat gauge rises. At the same time, exploration rewards you with collectibles that reduce encounter chances. You could even reward players with experience points through these collectibles, which solves another classic JRPG issue. Players who avoid optional combat usually become underleveled, and they are not strong enough for mandatory fights like bosses. With this system, traversal is no longer interrupted by exploration. Traversal is exploration. And you are not just avoiding combat, you are managing risk through movement skills. So if traversal rewards progression, exploration itself becomes meaningful growth. Now the player is constantly engaged. But there's still one final issue. Combat itself, because even if exploration feels fast, traditional turn-based combat can still kill momentum, which is why Helen's mysterious castle becomes such an interesting reference point. Its combat system is built around time pressure. Every action increases a wait timer. When that timer reaches 0, the enemy attacks. so every decision carries immediate consequences. Fast actions create more turns. Heavy attacks create risk. And unlike many traditional RPGs, combat feels reactive, almost rhythmic, and very, very fast. Which means the emotional pacing finally matches traversal. Fast movement outside combat, fast decision making inside combat. The systems reinforce each other instead of competing, and this opens the door for even more interaction. Games like Lufia 2 and Mystic Quest used tools for exploration, bombs, axes, and grappling hooks. And these mechanics matter because interactions create engagement. And now imagine party members also contributing to exploration and traversal. Now party composition affects exploration itself, and suddenly exploration becomes a tactical system without losing its momentum. Not just movement between battles, but there is still one place where this entire structure falls apart, and that's towns. Because towns expose how static JRPGs often are. In Velsarbor, verticality almost completely vanishes once you enter a settlement. Outside of towns, the player jumps, runs, and explores vertically. Inside towns, all that disappears. And that creates a dramatic loss of engagement. Because out of the 4 major JRPG pillars, exploration, combat, preparation, and narrative, 2 are suddenly weakened. Combat disappears, exploration becomes minimal, and interaction drops to its lowest possible level. And interaction is what creates engagement. Games like Alundra understood this. Its towns still encourage vertical exploration. Super Mario RPG also allows players to experiment with movements inside the settlements. CrossCode attempts this balance with fast and vertical exploration, but its automatic jumping system often feels slippery and imprecise, at least to me. There is, however, one game that combines many of these ideas surprisingly well, and that's Kingdoms of the Dump. It mixes vertical exploration with party-based interaction systems. Characters contribute unique abilities, resources can be collected directly on the overworld, and exploration constantly feeds progression. It never fully creates the feeling of speed that Velsarbor achieved. Its combat is slower and more tactical, but as a case study for developers, it is incredibly valuable because it points towards something larger. A Japanese-style role-playing game where movement itself becomes part of the core gameplay loop. Not just transportation between systems, but a system of expression, a system of tension, and most importantly, a system that keeps the player engaged every second they hold the controller. Maybe that is the future of JRPG exploration. Not bigger worlds, not more content, but movement that actually feels meaningful. Because once traversal becomes engaging, exploration stops being downtime, and it starts becoming gameplay. That concludes today's episode. If you know any games with interesting mechanics, please let me know in the comment section. I'm always looking for new systems to analyze. Now go out and create something beautiful. And remember, saying RPG game is like saying ATM machine. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.